Hello again, my name is Matt and welcome back to my channel. Goodbye 2020. What a year it has been. However, I did manage to read 214 books this year, and of those 214 books, I had about 30 or so 5-star books, and so it was really hard narrowing it down to my top favorites of the year, so I really stuck with the ones that have impacted me the most, the ones that I still think about all the time, the ones that I still remember the wonderful reading experience that I had with these books. Without further ado, let's get into it. And I did keep this list at only 2020 releases because I did read so much this year. It would just have been way too hard to include the backlist books and everything like that in this video. So to kick things off today, I did want to go ahead and show you my favorite backlist titles that I read this year. In 2020, I read all 4 Riley Sager books, and these 2 were definitely my favorites. Like Every Door, The Last Time I Lied, definitely a new favorite author for me. I loved all 4 books, but these 2 are definitely the top of the list for me. And the other backlist book that I had to mention here because it's a new all-time favorite for me is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I absolutely love this book. I'm sure that you guys know what this book is about by this point. It's been around for a while. It's a classic. It's been all over BookTube lately. It's a dark academia book about a group of college kids who are behind a murder, and this whole book is following the murder, and it's following the characters' lives and their personalities, and very unlikable characters, and all of these college kids are like very bent on success. It's really interesting getting into the minds of these kids, and Donna Tartt's writing was just incredible with this book. I need to read her other books this year. That's one of my goals. I want to read The Goldfinch and The Little Friend. I really loved this book a lot. I will say that the writing is quite dense. It's very academic, so it's not going to be for everyone's taste for sure, but I personally really enjoyed it. And then on the flip side, I also read a few arcs this year for books that come out in 2021, and I did want to go ahead and share my favorite of the 2021 releases that I read this year, and that was The Drowning Kind by Jennifer McMahon. This is probably best described as a contemporary fiction novel with elements of ghost story. It has a little bit of horror elements into it, but I wouldn't call it a scary book or as anything that's like super into horror territory. It definitely reads more of contemporary fiction in my opinion. But yeah, I thought this was so beautifully written. This cover is so beautiful also. I loved this book a lot. Another arc that I read this year, which I read on NetGalley, so I don't have a physical copy of it, was Every Last Fear by Alex Finley. Absolutely love that one. Look out for that one next year also. And so now we're getting into the nitty-gritty here with my top favorites of 2020. I wanted to cap this as a top 10 list, but I ended up having so many books that I wanted to talk about and include, and it proved impossible to rank these books into a top 10 because there were more than 10 that had a great impact on me this year and I really loved. So I was able to pick a top 5, but then the rest of these are just kind of unranked for me. I just wanted to give a shout out to these because they were some books that I really loved this year. So the first one I wanted to give a shout out to was Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. I guess this definitely goes without saying, but all of the books in this video are going to be 5-star books for me. Anxious People wrecked my soul. I loved this book. It was my first book by Frederick Bachman. Man, I went and literally bought all of his backlist books after reading this, and I really want to read more from him in 2021. This was so well written. It really like got me in the feels, you know? So basically in this book, we're following a hostage situation that takes place at an apartment viewing. So we've got a couple people that are in this apartment for an open house type of thing. And yeah, they ended up being held hostage. They get to know each other's backstories and more about each other's lives. And it's just really touching, really moving, really beautiful book. And there's also a little bit of a mystery aspect to it too, which of course I love. So yeah, this was a definite favorite for me. The next contemporary book that I really enjoyed this year was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. And I did a vlog when I read this book a few months ago, and I talked about how much I really connected with this book and how much of an impact that it left on me. And this is a bit of a magical realism type of book. We're following this character Nora, who at the beginning of the book, she is contemplating committing suicide. And when she does it, she's transported into this magical library, and she's given the choice to see what kind of different lives she could have led if just one choice was made differently previously in her life. Like, it could be anything. That she explores many, many different lives in this book. Has such a great theme to it. I really, really loved this one. I thought it was beautifully written. Yeah. And the next contemporary book that I really loved was The Girl with the Louding Voice by Addie. In this book, we're following Aduni, who's a 14-year-old Nigerian girl. She gets married away at a very young age, and she is able to escape and go live with a rich family. And Aduni's biggest goal in life is to become educated. She wants to learn English. She wants to go to school. She kind of secretly meets with this other lady who is friends with the couple that she's working for, and she's secretly tutoring her in English. And this book was just so unique because Aduni is the narrator of the book, and at the beginning of the book you can tell that she's speaking really broken English, and to some people it may be hard to follow this book. It was definitely a little difficult to follow at first because of the way that it is written, but we see Aduni's voice throughout the book as she learns more and more English and becomes more and more fluent. And the other fiction book, I don't have a physical copy of it, but it was Una Out of Order by Marguerite Montemore. In that book, we're following Una, who literally lives her life out of order. On New Year's Eve of every year, when the clock strikes midnight, she wakes up in a different year of her life, and it's not consecutive, it's not linear in any way. She just wakes up randomly, and the book was just so smartly written in that when she jumps forward in time, she leaves clues for herself, and we kind of work out how things piece together by the end of the book into her full life. And it's kind of a big puzzle that we as the reader are following also, as Una herself is trying to figure out the puzzle of what happens in these years that I have not actually lived through yet. And so it was such a unique book. I highly recommend that one to anyone who enjoys like magical realism type of books. It was also more of a fun book, I think. It had a lighter tone than, say, The Midnight Library. But yeah, definitely love that one. And next we have some mystery thrillers that I really loved this year. The first one is Invisible Girl by Lisa Jewell. Everything that I've written from Lisa Jewell so far has been 5 stars. I adore her writing so much. I think that she so expertly writes thrillers and pieces together these mysteries. In this book, we're following this teenage girl named Sapphire who goes missing, and this one has alternating viewpoints between what's actually happening with Sapphire, and we also have this guy that's a neighbor, this like creepy incel neighbor who they think is obviously the prime suspect. And so we're kind of unfolding this mystery and what actually happened with Sapphire. Really love this one. I don't ever want to talk too much about mystery thriller books because I don't want to give too much away about it. I think that these are always best to be read pretty blindly, just knowing the basics of it. So that's all I'm going to give you. Sorry. The next one was His and Hers by Alice Feeney. This is absolutely one of my favorite plot twists of the year, maybe even my #1 favorite plot twist of the year. The last part of this book was just so mind-blowing, so well written, so insanely well done. I loved this. In this book, we're following a divorced couple, Jack and Anna, and there's a murder going on. Anna is like a news person, and so she is assigned to kind of cover the story of this murder. So she ends up being closer to the murder than you think. And this book was just so, so well done. Loved it. And the next one is a very controversial opinion. I am aware of that. I feel like the only person on BookTube that absolutely loved this book, but whatever. This book was tailor-made for me, and that was One by One by Ruth Ware. This is just a classic murder mystery. If you're someone that prefers more of a thriller vibe, or you don't really like mysteries unless it's a thrilling, like fast-paced, fast-moving, hard-to-figure-out book, then this isn't for you. And that's probably why I think a lot of people did not enjoy this one. This one is a classic Agatha Christie style, straight-up whodunit murder mystery. It's a locked room mystery with a group of people who work for this tech startup company. They're trapped together in a cabin in the snow, and the atmosphere is just so wonderful. It's everything that I want in a murder mystery. I love whodunits. This one was done so well, in my opinion. I personally did not figure out the killer. A lot of people say that it was real obvious, but I guess I'm just stupid. But loved it anyway. And the last one I'm going to talk about, Long Bright River by Liz Moore. This one is actually set in Philadelphia, where I am, so that made me enjoy it a little more. This book, we're following a policewoman whose sister has gone missing. Her sister has a history of like drug abuse and getting involved with bad crowds and things like that. And so she's worried that she's been murdered, as some of the people that she has been running around with have recently been killed. It's kind of a mystery of trying to find out who the killer is that is going after these women, and also, is her sister really alive? What happened to her sister? It's such a great mystery, and it's also such a beautiful story about the relationship between the two sisters. I really enjoyed that aspect of it too. It was a wonderful mystery book. And now we are officially getting into the top 5 books. These are the ones that I absolutely could not stop thinking about this year. Definitely my absolute favorites, ones that I will think about for a long time to come, ones that I've been recommending to everyone this year. So if you've talked to me at any point this year, I've probably recommended one of these books to you. But the first one I'm going to talk about, my number 5 favorite of the year, is The Bright Lands by Jot Fram. This one is the most batshit crazy, cuckoo bananas, ridiculous, off the wall. What the fuck was this? I don't even know. I read it back in April or something like that, and I still don't fucking know what was going on in this book, but I loved it so much. This book was so gay, so weird. It's like a very weird version of a horror novel. Not super scary, in my opinion, if that's what you're looking for in a horror book. More of a horror book on the what the fuck kind of vibe. Will warn you that I think a lot of people went into this book with wrong expectations, because the blurb on the back of this book compares it to Friday Night Lights, and if you're going in thinking that this is something anywhere similar to Friday Night Lights, buddy, you're in for a rude awakening, because the only thing remotely similar to Friday Night Lights is that it follows a high school football team. That's the extent of the similarities. It's nothing like it in tone or anything like that at all. It's a dark horror book set in a small town. We're following this guy Joel, who grew up in this small Texas town. He's currently living in New York City, living his best gay man life. He gets a text from his brother that's really weird, and he thinks that he's in trouble, so he goes back to his hometown in Texas to try and investigate it, and the next day his brother goes missing. And so the whole book, they're trying to figure out what's going on with his brother. He learns about this thing called the Bright Lands. When you find out what the Bright Lands actually is, I don't even know what to say anymore about this book. It's just an experience that you have to have for yourself, and it's a wild ride. It's a fucking gay one too. All right. Number 4 on my list is one that I actually just read within the last week, and it already shot into my top 5 of the year. I loved it so much, and that is Take It Back by Kia Abdullah. And this one is one that I have not seen any hype around this year. It actually was originally released in the UK in 2019, so it's a year and a half old at this point, but it actually just came out here in the US this month in December. So it's just now getting its stateside release. But please pick this book up if this sounds interesting to you, because it is amazing. It is so well written. It's so layered. So many different dynamics going on in this book. This book is a legal thriller, I guess is what you would call it. Classifying something as a legal thriller automatically is to me, but this book was fucking, if you enjoyed TV shows like Defending Jacob, or even How to Get Away with Murder, I think you would really enjoy this book. Or if you enjoyed the book The Night Swim by Megan Golden this year, I think that you would like this one. It is a pretty similar thing going on in the book. We are following our lawyer Zara, and at the very beginning of the book, she's met by this 16-year-old girl named Jody, who is accusing these 4 guys that she goes to school with of basically gang raping her at this party. Jody has a facial deformity. She has the skin around her eye is drooping or whatever. I forget what that's called. But she has that kind of a disease, and so she feels like she's very unwanted by as far as male attention goes. And then when the 4 guys that she's accusing are approached, they have no idea what she's talking about. They deny everything. And as we go through this book, we learn that Jody herself has not been the most reliable person. And so the whole book, we're kind of kept on our toes as to which one of them is actually telling the truth. It, of course, goes to trial. and we figure out what actually happens, and then in the like very last part of the book we figure out like the real truth of what happened. And I was like this book kept me on my toes the whole time. I couldn't guess. I was trying to guess. I went back and forth through this whole book on who I thought was telling the truth. And yeah, it's a really, really interesting, dark book. There are definitely lots of graphic references to sexual violence in this book, so just be forewarned. If that's not your thing or if it's a trigger for you, like, I would stay away from this book. But otherwise, I thought that this was so good. This is actually the first book in a series I recently learned, and so I definitely like want to read the rest for sure. And number 3 on my list is one that I've talked about a lot, A Good Marriage by Kimberly McCreight. This one actually is a similar vibe to Take It Back. We're following a lawyer who gets contacted by an old college buddy to kind of defend him in a murder trial. And the story kind of unfolds as we follow Lizzie and her own marriage falling apart as she's investigating and trying to figure out what happened, the actual murder. And this is another one where I was pretty much guessing until the very end who actually committed the murder. And I thought that it was so well written, so interesting, and I couldn't put it down. And funny enough, my number 2 book this year, I actually just finished today, like earlier this afternoon. This is one that has been at the top of my most anticipated list for a long time this year, and I kind of purposefully saved it to be the very last book that I read of 2020 because I just had a gut feeling that I was going to love this book, and it ended up at number 2. No surprise for me, honestly. It was so beautiful, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. What can I say about this book that hasn't already been said? Every booktuber has read this lately. Everyone has raved about it. Everyone has loved it. I am just another one to sing the praises of Addie LaRue. And if you have been living under a rock or something and you still don't know what this book is about, we're following Addie LaRue, who was born in the late 1600s in France. When she's 23 years old, she kind of makes a deal with the devil that she wants to prolong her life. And the devil basically says, well, you can live as long as you want to. However, whenever you're ready to die, I get your soul. And so after she makes that deal, she finds out that basically what he's done is that no one that she meets in her life is able to remember her. Anytime she walks out the door or turns away from them, they completely forget who she is, and it's like she's a total stranger when they see her face again. And the majority of the book takes place in 2014 when she's living in New York, and she meets this guy, Henry, who is probably my favorite character of the year. There's a part in this book that's dedicated to Henry, and I absolutely loved that and resonated with that part of this book so much. I don't want to say too much about this book because I don't want to spoil anything. I truly think that this is just something that you just need to dive into it, just knowing that basic information about the plot, and just let yourself just get immersed in this book, because the writing in this book is just so beautiful, so magical. Loved it so much. We'll be raving about this book for many years, and I can't believe that this is my first V.E. Schwab book. I need to read like everything that she's ever written now, please. Yeah, read it if you haven't yet. And that brings us to my number 1 most favorite book of the year. And you probably already know what this is if you know me at all. The Book of Longings by Sumut Kid. I adored this book. I can't say enough good things about this book. It's so beautiful, and I think that I personally connected with this book so much because I grew up in church and being hammered in the head with the Bible stories and everything like that as a kid. And so this brought back a lot of memories for me, and I really resonated with the story and the retelling. Basically, the Book of Longings, we are following this girl, Anna, who is living back in like biblical times, and she ends up marrying Jesus. So the book is kind of exploring the question of what if Jesus actually had a wife. So the author's note in this book basically explains that she took the idea because it was so customary in those days for everyone to be married. Like, you were an outcast or just seen as really odd if you were not married. Because the Bible never explicitly says that Jesus was unmarried. It's such an interesting concept to explore, and Suma Kid just wrote this book so well. It was obviously so well researched. The first part of this book is like Anna's childhood before she meets Jesus. We get to about like the 100-page mark or so before she actually like meets Jesus and marries him. After they get married, she kind of ends up living her own life anyway. Jesus is off with his disciples, you know, going to preach everywhere, and so Anna is kind of left behind to figure things out for herself. I thought that it was so well done because the actual biblical stories that are included in the book are done in a very nuanced way. Anna feels like she is in the background for a lot of these biblical stories. And I feel like that was very realistic to the time because the women would always be kind of in the background of everything. And even though she was married to Jesus, she probably would have had a very minor role in his life and the lives of the men and people that were surrounding Jesus because he knew that it was his job to spread the word of God. The end of this book was so beautiful. We of course know, even if you haven't grown up in church, even if you're not familiar with the Bible, I'm sure everyone knows the most basic Bible stories of Jesus. And that's really all that you need to know going into this book. I do feel like I connected with it a lot more because I did grow up with all those stories and knowing all of those things. Even if you were never a religious person or anything like that, I feel like you would still enjoy this book just in the way that it was written and the story itself that's presented here. But of course, we all know what happens to Jesus at the end of his life, and that is explored in the book in such a unique way and an unexpected way. Really adored this book, and I am someone that does not even read historical fiction very often, so I'm as surprised as you guys are that this is my #1 book of the year. But I just thought that this was so beautiful, and like I said, I think that I connected with it a lot personally because I did grow up with all the Bible stories that are mentioned in the book. So I think that it had more of a personal level for me, which is why I connected with it so much. But yeah, so that is the conclusion of my best of 2020 list. Have you read any of these books? Did you love them as much as I did? Are you going to read any of these that I've been cramming down your throats this year? Please do. Thank you. And happy 2021.